The stars themselves seemed to bow before the mighty ships of the elven stellar empire. Across 7 galaxies, billions of worlds lived under the shadow of pointed ears and ancient magic. For 300 years, no force in the known universe had dared to challenge their rule. Empress Sylviana Moonwhisper sat on her crystal throne in the heart of Ethermore, the capital world that gleamed like a jewel among the stars. Her silver hair flowed like liquid moonlight down her shoulders, and her green eyes held the cold fire of someone who had never known defeat. The palace around her stretched for miles, built from materials that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Towers of pure energy rose into the sky, while gardens of singing crystals played melodies that could heal the sick or drive enemies mad. The Empress did not rule alone. General Lyraleigh Starweaver commanded the vast fleets that kept the Empire strong. She was tall even for an elf, with hair like spun gold and scars on her hands from 1,000 battles. Her ships moved between the stars faster than light itself, carrying weapons that could crack planets in half. No rebellion had lasted more than a few days under her watch. Admiral Elindra Nightblade, the Empress's own cousin, controlled the outer territories where new worlds were found and conquered. She was younger than the general, but just as deadly. Her dark hair was always tied back for battle, and her blue eyes missed nothing. She had personally led the conquest of 40 star systems, bringing them into the Empire's embrace, whether they wanted it or not. The elves ruled because they were simply better than everyone else. Their magic flowed through their technology like blood through veins. Their ships could appear and disappear at will. Their weapons struck with the power of stars. Their shields turned aside any attack. Even their smallest patrol craft could destroy the greatest warships of other species without effort. But it was not just their power that kept the Empire strong. It was fear. Every alien species had tried to fight them once. The reptilian Zarthek had seen their homeworld turn to glass when they refused to surrender. The insectoid swarms of the Vex Collective had watched their hive queens burned alive when they dared to resist. The energy beings called the Kylarn had been trapped in crystal prisons for 100 years after their first uprising. Now these species served the Empire in silence. They mined the minerals that fed elven industry. They grew the food that filled elven bellies. They built the ships that carried elven warriors to new conquests. They were allowed to live only because the elves found them useful. Zarathek had once been a proud warrior of her people. Now she served as a construction supervisor on a mining world, her scales dulled by years of defeat. She remembered when her people had ruled 12 systems of their own. Now they were lucky to keep their children from being taken as slaves. Vexana spoke for what remained of the insectoid collective. Her compound eyes had seen the glory days when her kind had built cities that touched the clouds. Now they lived in underground tunnels, working in factories that made weapons for their conquerors. Kylara was one of the few energy beings still free to move between the stars. Most of her kind had been captured and forced to power elven machines with their life force. She served as a messenger now, carrying orders from elven commanders to their alien servants. All of them had given up hope long ago. The elves were too strong, too smart, too perfect. They had magic and technology beyond anything the other species could imagine. Their empire stretched farther than any force could travel. Their armies numbered in the billions. Their weapons could destroy suns. On this day, Admiral Elindra was patrolling the edge of known space in her flagship. The ship was a work of art. As much as a weapon, its hull carved from a single massive crystal and powered by trapped starlight. She stood on the bridge watching the void, her officers around her monitoring 1,000 different systems. "Admiral," called her communications officer, "we are detecting strange energy readings from Sector 77 Alpha." Elindra turned toward the display. Energy readings in empty space usually meant someone was trying to hide something. Pirates sometimes used that area to avoid Imperial patrols, though they rarely posed any real threat. "How strange," she asked. "Very strange, Admiral. The patterns do not match any known technology. Not Elven, not any of the subject species. Something completely new." This got Elindra's attention. In 300 years of conquest, the Empire had cataloged every known technology in the galaxy. There should be nothing new left to find. Everything had been discovered, conquered, and absorbed into the Empire. Set course for the energy source, she ordered. Maximum stealth. If someone has developed new technology without our knowledge, we need to investigate. The ship turned toward the strange readings, its crystal hull bending light around it until it became nearly invisible. Elindra felt a small thrill of excitement. It had been years since anything truly unexpected had happened. Perhaps some forgotten species had finally developed something interesting. As they approached the source of the readings, Elindra's science officer called out new information. Admiral, I am detecting a single ship. Small, maybe 100 meters long. The technology is completely unknown. The hull appears to be made of simple metal alloys, but the energy signature is unlike anything in our databases. A single small ship with unknown technology. Elindra smiled slightly. This would be easy. They would capture the vessel, study its secrets, and add whatever useful knowledge it contained to the Empire's vast libraries. Then they would track down whoever built it and bring their world into the fold. Prepare tractor beams, she ordered. We will bring them aboard for questioning and send a message to the Empress. Tell her we may have found a new species to conquer. The Admiral had no way of knowing that this single small ship would change everything. She could not imagine that. These unknown aliens would refuse to bow like all the others. She had never faced an enemy that did not follow the rules of war that had governed the galaxy for centuries. In a few hours, Admiral Elindra would learn that some species were different. Some species did not know when they were beaten. Some species had never learned to surrender. The Elven Empire had dominated worlds for 3 centuries. But their reign was about to meet its greatest test from the most unlikely source imaginable. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace with a flash of blue light that lit up the darkness between the stars. Captain Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of humanity's first deep space exploration vessel, watching the star charts update themselves as the ship's computers mapped their new location. "Well, we made it," she said, running a hand through her short brown hair. "Wherever here is." The ship around her was small compared to the massive vessels that traveled between Earth's colonies, but it represented years of human engineering and hope. Every system had been built to last, every component designed to handle the unknown. The crew of 35 had volunteered for a mission that might take them away from home forever. Commander Kate Sullivan checked her instruments at the tactical station. She was a former military officer who had joined the space service when the wars on Earth finally ended. Her red hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes constantly scanned for threats. "No immediate dangers detected, Captain," Kate reported. "But I am picking up some interesting readings in the far distance. Looks like there might be other ships out there." Dr. Amanda Foster looked up from her medical station where she had been running long-range biological scans. She was the ship's chief medical officer, but her real specialty was studying alien life. Her blonde hair was tied back with a simple band, and her blue eyes sparkled with excitement. "This is amazing," Amanda said. "I am detecting multiple life signs across this region of space. Not just 1 or 2 species, but dozens, maybe hundreds. We have found a populated galaxy." Lieutenant Maya Chen worked at the engineering station, her black hair falling across her face as she studied the power readings. She was young for her position, but she had designed half the systems on the ship herself. Her small hands moved quickly across the controls as she tried to understand what the sensors were telling her. "Captain, these energy signatures are incredible," Maya said. "Some of these ships are using power sources I cannot even identify. The technology out here is far ahead of anything we have on Earth." Ensign Nicole Parker sat at the communications station, her headset covering her brown hair as she tried to make sense of the signals filling the area. She was the youngest member of the senior crew, but she had a gift for languages and codes that had earned her a place on the mission. "I am picking up thousands of different communication channels," Nicole reported. "Most of them are encrypted, but the patterns suggest a highly organized civilization. Maybe even an empire." Captain Martinez nodded thoughtfully. The mission planners on Earth had hoped they might find other intelligent species, but they had not expected to stumble into such a densely populated region. This could be the greatest discovery in human history, or their greatest mistake. "All stop," she ordered. "Let's take some time to study the situation before we announce ourselves." But they were already too late. Admiral Elindra's ship had been watching them since the moment they arrived. The elven vessel had been completely invisible to human sensors, its advanced stealth technology making it impossible to detect. Alindra studied the strange new ship through her view screen. It was tiny compared to even the smallest elven patrol craft, and its design was primitive beyond belief. The hull appeared to be made of simple steel and ceramic composites. The engines used chemical rockets with some kind of exotic matter enhancement. The weapons, if they could be called weapons, seemed to fire solid projectiles. "This is what created those energy readings?" she asked her science officer. "Yes, Admiral. Their faster-than-light drive is completely unknown to us, but it appears to be based on folding space rather than our displacement technology. Very crude, but surprisingly effective." Alindra almost laughed. After centuries of conquering advanced civilizations, they had found a species that was still building ships out of metal and shooting bullets at their enemies. This would not even qualify as a minor challenge. "Drop stealth and move to intercept," she ordered. "Open a communication channel. Let's see what these primitives have to say for themselves." On the USS Defiance, alarms suddenly filled the bridge as a massive ship appeared directly in front of them. The vessel was 3 times longer than their own ship and seemed to be made of living crystal. It pulsed with internal light, and energy fields surrounded it like a protective shell. "Where did that come from?" Kate demanded, her hands moving to the weapon controls. "Unknown," Maya replied, her voice tight with stress. "It just appeared out of nowhere. No engine signature, no heat bloom, nothing. 1 second empty space, the next second a ship." "They're hailing us," Nicole announced. "Audio and visual." Captain Martinez straightened her uniform. "Put it on screen." The main display filled with the image of Admiral Alindra standing on her crystal bridge. The elf was tall and beautiful in an otherworldly way, with pointed ears and eyes that seemed to hold starlight. Her dark hair was perfectly arranged, and her uniform appeared to be made of liquid silver. "I am Admiral Alindra Nightblade of the Elven Stellar Empire," she said, her voice carrying easily across the communication link. "You have entered Imperial space without authorization. Identify yourselves immediately." Lisa took a deep breath. First contact with an alien species was happening faster than anyone had planned. "I am Captain Lisa Martinez of the human vessel USS Defiance. We come in peace from the planet Earth. We were not aware this region was claimed by any government." Alindra's eyebrows rose slightly. "Human? Earth? These names are not in our databases. What remote corner of the galaxy spawned your species?" "We come from outside this galaxy," Lisa replied carefully. "Our homeworld is in what we call the Milky Way. We are explorers seeking to make contact with other intelligent species." "Explorers?" Alindra repeated, her tone becoming amused. "How quaint. It has been centuries since we encountered a species naive enough to believe in peaceful exploration. Your kind will learn quickly that there is only one law in this galaxy, the law of the Elven Empire." Dr. Foster stepped closer to the captain. "Admiral Alindra, we would be honored to learn about your civilization. Perhaps we could arrange a cultural exchange." Alindra actually laughed at this. "Cultural exchange? Child, your species has nothing to offer the Empire except labor and resources. You will surrender your vessel immediately and prepare to be transported to the nearest processing center. Your world will be located and absorbed into the Empire within the year." The bridge of the USS Defiance fell silent. The casual way the elf spoke of conquering their home world sent chills through the entire crew. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable," Captain Martinez said firmly. "We are peaceful explorers, but we will not surrender our ship or betray our homeworld." "You will not?" Alindra seemed genuinely surprised. "Do you understand what you are facing? The Elven Empire has conquered 7 galaxies. Our fleets number in the millions. Our weapons can destroy stars. Your little metal box would not survive a single shot from our weakest patrol craft." "Maybe not," Lisa admitted, "but humans don't surrender just because the odds are bad." Alindra studied the human captain for a long moment. The primitive alien seemed serious about resisting, despite facing impossible odds. It was almost admirable in its futility. "Very well," the Admiral said. "You have chosen the difficult path. General Lyralai will arrive shortly with a proper fleet to deal with your resistance. I suggest you use the time to reconsider your position." The communication link closed, leaving the bridge of the USS Defiance in tense silence. "Captain, Kate said quietly. "We need to get out of here. Now." "No," Lisa replied, staring at the crystal ship that hung before them like a beautiful threat. "We came here to explore and make contact. Running away now would just doom Earth to be found and conquered later. We make our stand here." The USS Defiance, alone and impossibly outgunned, prepared to face an empire that had never known defeat. General Leralai Starweaver arrived with 200 ships, their crystal hulls gleaming like deadly jewelry against the black of space. Each vessel was a masterpiece of elven engineering, powered by captured starlight and armed with weapons that could shatter mountains. The general herself stood on the bridge of her flagship, her golden hair flowing behind her like a banner of war. She had conquered 43 star systems in her career. She had broken the will of species that had ruled space for millions of years. She had never lost a battle, never retreated, never faced an enemy that could surprise her. The single human ship waiting for her would be the easiest victory of her life. "Admiral Ilindra sends her greetings," Lyralay said into the communication link with the USS Defiance. "I am General Lyralai Starweaver, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed." Captain Lisa Martinez stood on her bridge, looking at the massive formation of ships that surrounded her vessel. 200 against 1. The odds were so bad they were almost funny. Her crew moved quietly at their stations, checking weapons and shields one last time. "General, I already told your admiral our position," Lisa replied. "Humans don't surrender." "Then, you will die," Lyralai said simply. "Target their engines. Disable them for capture." The elven ships moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons beginning to glow with deadly energy. They had done this dance 1,000 times before. Overwhelm the enemy, demonstrate superior power, accept their surrender. It was as predictable as sunrise. "All ships fire," Lyralay commanded. 200 beams of pure energy lanced out toward the USS Defiance. The beams were precisely aimed to cripple rather than destroy. The elves wanted prisoners to interrogate and a ship to study. But the human vessel did something impossible. Instead of trying to absorb or deflect the energy beams, it simply wasn't there when they arrived. The ship had somehow moved sideways, in space without using any visible engines, slipping between the incoming fire like water through fingers. "What?" Lyralai stared at her tactical display. "How did they do that?" Lieutenant Maya Chen grinned at her engineering station aboard the USS Defiance. She had been working on modifications to their hyperspace drive ever since they had encountered Admiral Ilindra. The elves used displacement technology that moved them instantly from one point to another. Humans used folding technology that bent space itself. "Micro jumps," Maya announced proudly. "I figured out how to use our drive for tiny little hops. We can blink in and out of normal space faster than their targeting computers can track." "Outstanding work," Captain Martinez said. "Now let's see how they handle some return fire." The USS Defiance had 6 missile tubes and 2 railguns. Against an empire that could destroy stars, it was barely a mosquito bite. But Maya had been busy with those weapons too. "Firing pattern Delta," she called out. "Missiles away." 12 missiles streaked out from the human ship, but they did not fly straight toward their targets. Instead, they began jumping in and out of hyperspace, appearing and disappearing randomly as they closed on the elven fleet. The elven point defense systems, designed to track predictable projectiles, could not lock onto targets that kept vanishing. The first missile struck an elven cruiser amidships, its simple explosive warhead doing minimal damage to the crystal hull. But the second missile carried one of Maya's special surprises. When it exploded, it released a burst of electromagnetic energy that interfered with the delicate balance between magic and technology that powered elven systems. The cruiser's shields flickered and died. Its weapons went offline. Its engines sputtered as the magical components failed to synchronize with the technological ones. "Impossible," General Lyralai breathed. "Their weapons are too primitive to penetrate our defenses." But more missiles were hitting now, each one carrying the same electromagnetic pulse. Across the elven fleet, ships began losing power as their hybrid systems struggled to compensate for the interference. The weapons that had conquered galaxies were suddenly as useless as expensive sculptures. "All ships, fall back and regroup," Lyralai ordered. "Switch to pure technology systems only." The Elven fleet pulled back, their crews working frantically to restart weapons and shields using backup technological systems. It should have been a minor setback, a small delay before they crushed the human ship, but the USS Defiance was not done. Commander Kate Sullivan had been studying the Elven formation patterns during their approach. She had noticed something the elves themselves had forgotten after centuries of easy victories. "Captain, they're flying in a ceremonial pattern," Kate announced. "It's designed to look impressive, not to fight effectively. Their ships are blocking each other's fields of fire." "Then let's take advantage of that," Lisa replied. "Maya, can you get us inside their formation?" "Already working on it," Maya said, her hands dancing across the hyperspace controls. "Jumping in 3, 2, 1. The USS Defiance vanished and reappeared in the center of the Elven fleet, surrounded by massive crystal ships that suddenly could not fire without hitting each other. The human ship spun and twisted between the giants, its railguns punching holes in hulls that had never been damaged before. Dr. Amanda Foster monitored the battle from her medical station, but she was also running scans on the Elven ships and crews. Her readings showed something fascinating. "Captain, I think I know why our electromagnetic pulses are so effective," she called out. "The elves' nervous systems are naturally attuned to magical fields. When we disrupt their technology, we're also disrupting their ability to think clearly." It was true. Aboard the Elven ships, crews that had functioned with perfect efficiency for centuries were suddenly confused and disoriented. The electromagnetic interference was not just affecting their machines, it was affecting their minds. General Lyrelay gripped the railing of her bridge as another human missile exploded nearby. Her thoughts felt sluggish, her reflexes slow. Around her, officers who had served with mechanical precision were making mistakes, giving contradictory orders, failing to coordinate their responses. "How are they doing this?" she demanded. "They're primitives. They build their ships out of metal and fire solid bullets. This should be impossible." But the impossible was happening. The human ship continued to blink in and out of existence, striking at Elven vessels and vanishing before they could respond. Their formation was in chaos, their weapons offline, their crews struggling to function. Ensign Nicole Parker had been busy during the battle too. While the elves were distracted by the fighting, she had been working to penetrate their communication networks. Human computer technology was crude compared to Elven systems, but it was also completely unknown to Elven security programs. "Captain, I'm into their command network," Nicole announced. "Their security never expected intrusion from this type of system. I can broadcast on all their channels." "Do it," Lisa ordered. "Let every ship in this fleet see what's happening." Nicole's fingers flew across her console, and suddenly every screen in the Elven fleet showed the same image. The USS Defiance, tiny and outnumbered, dancing between the crystal giants like a shark among whales. The impossible sight of a single primitive ship defeating an Imperial fleet was broadcast to thousands of Elven warriors. The psychological effect was devastating. For 3 centuries, Elven forces had never lost a battle. They had believed themselves invincible, superior to all other life in the universe. Now they watched their most powerful ships being systematically disabled by a vessel they could have destroyed with a single shot under normal circumstances. General Lyrelay tried to rally her forces, but the electromagnetic interference was getting worse. Her flagship's main reactor was fluctuating as the magical and technological components fought each other. Around her, the proud fleet of the Empire was in full retreat, their crews too confused and disoriented to fight effectively. "All ships, withdraw to safe distance," she finally ordered. "We will regroup and develop new tactics." But as the Elven fleet pulled back, leaving debris and disabled ships behind, everyone knew that something fundamental had changed. The invincible Empire had been defeated by a single ship from a species they had never heard of. Aboard the USS Defiance, Captain Martinez watched the Elven fleet retreat and allowed herself a small smile. They had won the battle, but she knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, an entire empire was about to learn that humans were not like other species. Humans did not surrender. Humans did not bow. And most importantly, humans never fought fair when their survival was at stake. The message would spread across 7 galaxies. The elves could be beaten. The impossible had become possible, and nothing would ever be the same. The news traveled faster than light itself, carried by the very communication networks the elves had built to control their empire. On 1,000 worlds across 7 galaxies, alien species who had lived in fear for 3 centuries watched the impossible footage over and over again. A single human ship had defeated an imperial fleet. The invincible elves had been beaten. Zarathek stood in the mining tunnels of Kepler-7, her scaled hands gripping a plasma cutter as she watched the broadcast on a hidden screen. Around her, dozens of reptilian workers had stopped their labor to stare at the images. The massive elf ships retreating, the tiny human vessel dancing between them like a predator among prey. "It cannot be real," whispered her friend Krax, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "The elves are too strong. They have always been too strong." But Zarathek remembered the days before the conquest, when her people had ruled 12 star systems and built cities that touched the clouds. She remembered the pride of her species before it had been broken on elven altars. She remembered what it felt like to be free. "It is real," she said quietly. "And if one small ship can do this, imagine what we could do if we all fought together." Deep in the hive chambers of Vex Prime, Vexana felt the collective consciousness of her people stirring with something they had not experienced in generations: hope. The insectoid workers who had labored in elven factories for decades suddenly lifted their heads and clicked their mandibles in excitement. The hive mind spoke with one voice through Vexana's throat. "The humans have shown us the truth we had forgotten. The elves bleed like any other species. They can be defeated like any other enemy." In the energy storms between the stars, Kylara pulsed with colors that had not been seen since her people's enslavement. The crystalline beings who had once ruled nebulae felt the ancient fire of rebellion burning in their plasma hearts. They had been forced to power elven machines for so long, they had almost forgotten they were alive. "The time of servitude ends now," Kylara's energy form blazed across the void. "We will no longer be batteries for their empire." But nowhere was the reaction stronger than on Ethermore itself, in the Crystal Palace where Empress Sylviana Moonwhisper had ruled unchallenged for 2 centuries. She stood before a wall of screens, showing reports from across the empire, her silver hair dark with fury and her green eyes burning with rage. "How is this possible?" she demanded of her advisors. "A single primitive ship defeats our finest fleet?" "The reports are confirmed, Your Majesty," replied her intelligence minister, his hands shaking as he delivered the news. "General Lyralai's fleet suffered 60% casualties. 30 ships destroyed, 50 more disabled. The human vessel escaped without significant damage." "And the footage?" "Being broadcast on every communication channel in the Empire. Our forces cannot stop the transmission. The human ship's computer systems are too primitive for our security protocols to recognize." Sylviana turned to stare out at her capital city, where elven citizens moved through floating gardens and crystal towers. For 300 years, they had lived in perfect peace, secure in their superiority over all other life. Now that security was cracking like thin ice. "Summon all fleet commanders immediately," she ordered. "Every ship, every weapon, every warrior in the Empire. We will crush these humans and their allies before this rebellion spreads further." But it was already too late. The rebellion had begun the moment the first alien species saw an elven fleet retreat. On Kepler-7, Zarathek led her workers out of the mines and toward the elven command center. They carried plasma cutters and mining explosives, tools that could be turned into weapons with a little creativity. The elven guards, still reeling from news of the fleet's defeat, were caught completely off guard. "For our children," Zarathek roared as she led the charge. "For our freedom!" The reptilian uprising spread from world to world as news traveled between mining colonies. Within hours, 12 star systems that had been conquered decades ago were in open revolt. Vexana coordinated the insectoid rebellion through the hive mine network that connected her people across the galaxy. Factory workers stopped building elven ships and started building weapons instead. Tunnel complexes became fortresses. Queens who had been forced to serve as living manufacturing plants began producing warrior drones for the first time in centuries. Kylara and her energy-being companions struck at the heart of elven infrastructure. They overloaded power grids, caused fusion reactors to explode, and turned the Empire's own energy weapons against their creators. Systems that had been stable for generations suddenly failed as the beings who powered them chose freedom over servitude. But the humans were not idle during this galactic uprising. Captain Lisa Martinez had made a decision that would change the course of the war. Instead of trying to escape back to Earth, the USS Defiance would stay and help coordinate the rebellion. "These people have been enslaved for 3 centuries," she told her crew. "We started this fight when we refused to surrender. Now we need to help finish it." Dr. Amanda Foster worked around the clock to share what they had learned about elven weaknesses. The electromagnetic pulse that disrupted their magic technology hybrid systems could be replicated by any species with basic electrical knowledge. Soon, rebel forces across the galaxy were building crude EMP weapons based on human designs. Lieutenant Maya Chen helped alien engineers adapt human tactics to their own technology. The micro-jump technique that had let the USS Defiance dance around the Elven fleet could be modified for any faster-than-light drive system. Rebel ships began appearing and disappearing in battle, striking at Elven forces and vanishing before they could respond. Commander Kate Sullivan shared human military doctrine with rebel commanders across dozens of species. The elves had forgotten how to fight unpredictable enemies after centuries of easy victories. Human tactics, based on flexibility and adaptation rather than rigid formations, gave the rebels advantages they had never imagined. Ensign Nicole Parker worked to keep the rebellion connected through the galaxy's communication networks. She helped alien species that had never spoken to each other coordinate their attacks and share intelligence about elven movements. But perhaps most importantly, the humans provided something the rebels had lost long ago: the absolute refusal to give up. Every alien species had surrendered to the elves eventually. Every resistance movement had been broken. Every rebellion had failed. The humans had never learned to surrender. They fought when the odds were impossible. They adapted when their weapons failed. They found new ways to win when all the old ways had been tried and failed. This spirit spread through the rebellion like wildfire. Alien species that had been broken for generations suddenly remembered what it felt like to fight for something worth dying for. Admiral Elindra found herself caught in the middle of this galactic storm. Her own ship had been damaged in the first battle with the humans, and now she was trapped in a repair facility that was under attack by energy beings. As she watched her proud vessel being torn apart by creatures that had once powered its engines, she began to understand how completely the Empire's situation had changed. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "message from the human ship." Elindra straightened her uniform and accepted the transmission. Captain Martinez appeared on her screen, and the elf was surprised by what she saw. The human looked tired but determined, and her eyes held something Elindra had never seen in a conquered species: absolute certainty that she would win. "Admiral, I'm offering you a chance to join us," Lisa said simply. "Your empire is falling apart. Your people are fighting a war they cannot win against enemies who will never surrender. Help us end this peacefully, and we can build something better together." Elindra stared at the human captain for a long moment. Around her, the repair facility shook as another energy being attack hit the outer defenses. In the distance, she could see the glow of rebellion spreading across the night sky. "You think you have already won," she said. "I think your empire was doomed the moment it forgot that some people will never bow," Lisa replied. "We're offering you a choice. Be part of the solution or be swept away with the problem." For the first time in her long life, Admiral Elindra began to consider the possibility that the elves might be on the wrong side of history. The thought was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Across the Empire, similar conversations were happening as elven officers began to question orders that had seemed natural for centuries. The rebellion was not just changing the balance of power in the galaxy, it was changing the way everyone thought about power itself. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had shattered the myth of elven invincibility and given hope to species that had forgotten what freedom meant. Now the real war could begin. The final battle for Ethermoor began with a sight that had never been seen in 3 centuries of elven rule: a fleet of alien ships approaching the imperial capital as equals rather than slaves. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of species moved together through the void, their different technologies and designs united by a common purpose. Zarathek commanded the reptilian contingent from the bridge of a converted mining ship. The vessel had been built to crack asteroids, but its plasma cutters worked just as well on elven crystal hulls. Around her, warriors who had spent decades in chains stood proud at their stations. Vexana coordinated the insectoid swarm ships through the hive mind link. Each vessel was small and individually weak, but together they moved like a living organism, striking at weak points and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Kylara led the energy beings in a dance of light and fury, their plasma forms wrapping around elven ships and overloading their systems from within. They had been batteries for the Empire for too long. Now they were weapons of liberation, and at the center of it all flew the USS Defiance, the small human ship that had started everything. Captain Lisa Martinez stood on her bridge, watching the planet that had ruled the galaxy for centuries grow larger on the main screen. "All rebel forces, this is Captain Martinez," she broadcast on all channels. "Today we end an empire that has enslaved the galaxy for 300 years. Today we prove that freedom is stronger than fear." On Ethermoor itself, Empress Sylviana, Moonwhisper prepared for her final stand. The Crystal Palace was surrounded by the largest defensive fleet ever assembled, every remaining ship in the Empire called home to protect their ruler. But even as she watched the rebel forces approach, she knew the truth that her advisors were afraid to speak. The Empire was already dead. It had died the moment a single human ship had refused to surrender. "Your Majesty?" General Lirale stood beside the throne, her golden hair now streaked with silver from the stress of the losing war. "Perhaps it is time to consider negotiations." Negotiations. Sylviana's green eyes blazed with fury. "We are the Elven Empire. We do not negotiate with slaves." "They are not slaves anymore," Lirale said quietly. "They never really were. We just convinced ourselves they were." The Empress turned to stare at her most trusted general, the elf who had conquered 43 star systems in her name. "You would have me surrender to primitives?" "I would have you accept reality," Lirale replied. "We lost this war the moment. We forgot that every species we conquered was still capable of choosing to fight." Admiral Elindra had already made her choice. Her damaged ship now flew with the rebel fleet, its crew working alongside former enemies to coordinate the final assault. She had broadcast a message across the Empire's military networks, calling on Elven forces to lay down their weapons and join the rebellion. Many had listened. Entire fleets had defected rather than fight a war they no longer believed in. The Empire that had once seemed unbreakable was crumbling from within. The battle for Ethermoor was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not the usual Elven pattern of overwhelming force crushing weak resistance. Instead, it was chaos on a massive scale, as hundreds of different tactical doctrines clashed in the space around the capital world. Maya Chen had taught the rebels well. Ships appeared and disappeared unpredictably, striking at Elven forces and vanishing before they could respond. The rigid Elven formations that had worked for centuries were useless against enemies who refused to follow the established rules of warfare. Kate Sullivan's tactical innovations spread through the rebel fleet like wildfire. Instead of meeting Elven strength with strength, the rebels flowed around it like water, finding weak points and exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. Dr. Amanda Foster's EMP weapons disrupted Elven hybrid systems across the battlefield, turning their greatest strength into a weakness. Ships that had seemed invincible suddenly found themselves helpless as their magic and technology failed to work together. Nicole Parker's communication hacks allowed the rebels to coordinate their attacks, while jamming Elven commands. The Empire's forces found themselves fighting blind while their enemies shared perfect information across multiple species and languages. But the real weapon the humans had given the rebellion was something more powerful than any technology: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Every time the Elven forces seemed to gain an advantage, the rebels adapted and found a new way to fight. Every time surrender seemed logical, they chose to continue the battle. This spirit infected every species in the rebel fleet. Aliens who had been broken by centuries of slavery remembered what it meant to be warriors. They fought not just for victory, but for the right to determine their own destiny. As the battle raged around Ethermoor, Empress Sylviana found herself facing a choice she had never imagined having to make. Her empire was falling apart around her. Her fleets were in retreat or defecting to the enemy. Her capital world was under siege by the very species she had ruled for centuries. "Your Majesty," her intelligence minister approached the throne with trembling hands. "Captain Martinez is requesting a direct communication link." Sylviana stared at the screen showing the battle above her world. Rebel ships danced between the wreckage of her once mighty fleet, and the crystal spires of her palace shook with each explosion in orbit. "Put her through," she said finally. Captain Lisa Martinez appeared on the main display, and Sylviana was surprised by what she saw. The human looked tired but not triumphant. There was no joy in her eyes, only determination, and something that might have been sadness. "Empress Sylviana," Lisa said formally, "I'm calling to offer you terms for surrender." "Surrender?" Sylviana's voice was ice-cold. "I am the ruler of 7 galaxies. I do not surrender to anyone." "Your empire is gone," Lisa replied gently. "Your fleets are destroyed or defected. Your worlds are in rebellion. You can end this now and save whatever is left of your people, or you can fight to the last elf and accomplish nothing except more death." "And what terms do you offer?" "Amnesty for all elven civilians and military personnel who lay down their weapons. A place for your species in the new galactic government we're going to build. An end to slavery and conquest, but not an end to elven civilization." Sylviana stood and walked to the great window that looked out over her capital city. Below, millions of elves went about their daily lives, unaware that their world was about to change forever. They had never known anything but victory and dominance. How could they adapt to being just another species among equals? And if I refuse? Then this battle continues until every elven ship is destroyed and every elven world is occupied by rebel forces. Your people will suffer for your pride. General Lirelai stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I formally advise surrender. We cannot win this war." Sylviana closed her eyes and felt the weight of 3 centuries of imperial rule settling on her shoulders. Her ancestors had built this empire through strength and cunning. She would be the one to end it through wisdom and mercy. "Very well," she said quietly. "I, Sylviana Moonwhisper, Empress of the Elven Stellar Empire, hereby surrender unconditionally to the Rebel Alliance." The words echoed through every communication channel in the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, alien species who had lived in fear for generations heard their former ruler accept defeat. The impossible had happened. The empire was truly over. In the months that followed, the galaxy began the long process of building something new. A galactic council was formed with representatives from every species, including the elves who had once ruled them all. Captain Martinez was offered the position of Supreme Commander of the new Galactic Defense Force, a role she accepted with reluctance. "I never wanted to be a conqueror," she told Dr. Foster as they watched construction begin on the new council chambers. "I just wanted to explore." "You're not a conqueror," Amanda replied. "You're a liberator. There's a difference." General Lirelai took charge of reforming the elven military culture, working to transform warriors who had known only conquest into defenders of peace. It was not easy work, but she approached it with the same determination that had once made her the Empire's greatest general. Admiral Elindra became the first elven representative to the Galactic Council, her defection having earned her the trust of the former slave species. She worked tirelessly to build bridges between peoples who had been enemies for centuries. Zarathek returned to rebuilding her people's worlds, but she also served as a military advisor to the new Galactic Defense Force. Her experience fighting, both for and against the Empire, made her invaluable in training forces that would never again allow one species to dominate the others. Vexana helped establish communication protocols between species that had never spoken as equals before. The insectoid hive mind's ability to process multiple conversations simultaneously made her perfect for coordinating the complex negotiations required to build a galactic government. Kylara and the energy beings took charge of developing new technologies. That combined the best innovations of all species without giving any one group a decisive advantage. The days of magical superiority were over. Years later, statues of the USS Defiance and its crew stood on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy. The small ship that had refused to surrender had become a symbol of hope and freedom for billions of beings. Captain Martinez, now an admiral in the Galactic Defense Force, often stood before these statues and remembered the day they had dropped out of hyperspace into what they thought was empty void. They had come seeking new worlds and new species to befriend. Instead, they had found an empire that needed to end and people who needed to be free. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still conflicts between species, still disagreements about policy and territory. But there was no longer any single power that could enslave entire civilizations. There was no longer any species that believed itself inherently superior to all others. Most importantly, there was hope. Hope that problems could be solved through cooperation rather than conquest. Hope that diversity made the galaxy stronger rather than weaker. Hope that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. The USS Defiance had proven that even the mightiest empire could fall to a single ship crewed by people who refused to give up. It was a lesson the galaxy would never forget, and a legacy that would inspire generations of beings to come. The age of elven domination was over. The age of galactic cooperation had begun.